The microphone was already warm in my hand when I looked down at the folder tucked under my arm, 3 sheets of paper that were about to end my family as I'd known it for 31 years. Behind me, a projector screen glowed blank, waiting. In front of me, 200 people in cocktail attire were holding champagne flutes under a banner that read 25 years of the Iron Skillet, and my brother was standing by the hostess stand in a navy suit he definitely hadn't paid for himself, practicing his acceptance smile. My mother caught my eye from the second row and gave me the tiniest nod, the one that meant don't embarrass us. She had no idea. In about 90 seconds, I was going to press a button, and the ownership plaque she and my father had commissioned, the one with only my brother's name engraved on it, was going to mean nothing at all. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. 8 years to be exact. I'm Rachel Holland, and if you're new here, welcome to Revenge Marrow, the place where the paper trail always outlives the lie. This is the story of how my family tried to erase 8 years of my labor with one notarized document, and how a stranger's hood vent permit from 2019 ended up being the thing that saved me. The Iron Skillet sat on Corbett Avenue in Thornwell, a squat brick building with a hand-painted sign my grandmother had commissioned back when the restaurant first opened. My parents, Robert and Linda Holland, had built it from nothing, and by the time I was in my 20s, it was a neighborhood fixture. The place with the corned beef hash people drove across town for on Sunday mornings. My brother, Kevin, was 2 years younger than me and had always been the one photographed shaking hands with the mayor at ribbon cuttings. I was the one who fixed the walk-in cooler when it died at 4 a.m. before a Saturday brunch rush. 8 years ago, the restaurant nearly didn't survive to see its anniversary at all. A burst pipe flooded the kitchen 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. Insurance covered less than half the damage, and the bank was circling. My grandmother, Louise, had passed the year before and left me a modest inheritance, $180,000, most of it from the sale of her house. I was 24 and had just finished my contractor's apprenticeship. I put every dollar of that inheritance into gutting and rebuilding the kitchen myself, pulling permits, laying tile, rewiring the walk-in, working nights and weekends around my day job for the better part of a year. My parents sat across the kitchen table from me the week I handed over the check and told me, in front of Kevin, that once the dust settled, I'd be made an equal owner. 50-50, my father said, and shook my hand like it was a business deal instead of a family conversation. My mother poured coffee into 4 mugs, set one in front of each of us, and said, "You're saving this family, Rachel. That makes you family in every way that matters now, not just blood." I remember exactly how that sentence felt at the time, warm, generous, the kind of thing you tuck away and take out later on hard days. Nobody wrote it down. I didn't ask them to. I was 24, sitting in a kitchen that still smelled like drywall dust and the bleach we'd used to kill the mold along the baseboards, and I trusted my own parents to keep their word to their own daughter. That's the whole tragedy in one sentence, if you want it early. The rebuild itself took 11 months. I remember the exact morning I ripped out the old walk-in cooler compressor with a borrowed dolly and a coworker named Owen from my apprenticeship crew, both of us cursing under our breath because the unit weighed more than either of us had accounted for. I remember laying subway tile on the kitchen wall until 2 a.m. 3 nights running, my knees wrapped in dish towels because I couldn't afford knee pads and a floor steamer in the same month. My father would stop by some evenings, tell me it was looking good, kiddo, and leave before the heavy lifting started. Kevin came by exactly twice that whole year, once to drop off pizza for the crew and once to take photos of the half-finished dining room for what he called before and after content. For the next 8 years, I kept showing up. I redid the flooring twice. I replaced the roof after a hailstorm. I built the outdoor patio with my own hands over 4 consecutive weekends, working construction gigs during the day and framing decking after dark under a shop light clamped to the fence. I never took a paycheck for any of it. My parents called it sweat equity, which is a phrase that sounds a lot more romantic when you're not the one bleeding the sweat. Kevin, meanwhile, handled the Instagram account and the local press releases and got quoted in the Thornwell Gazette as the next generation of Iron Skillet leadership. Nobody ever printed my name. By this spring, the restaurant was gearing up for its 25th anniversary, and my parents decided to throw a relaunch gala, new dining room, new patio lighting, a ribbon cutting with the mayor's office again, the whole production. And because I was, as always, the only person in the family who actually knew how to manage vendors, timelines, and a budget, I got handed the entire event to run. Kevin got handed the toast. I spent that January and February the way I'd spent most Januaries and Februaries before, on a ladder on the phone with a linen rental company, cross-referencing a spreadsheet of 43 vendor contacts, while Kevin posted a countdown graphic to the restaurant's Instagram every Sunday with a caption about big changes coming. At a planning meeting in February, my mother handed me a laminated seating chart and asked me to make sure the head table faced the projector screen, so the lighting's good for photos of Kevin's announcement. I asked, half joking, what announcement exactly, since as far as I knew the night was just a relaunch and ribbon cutting. She waved a hand and said, "Details, Rachel, don't worry about it, just get the AV squared away." I let it go. I'd been letting things go for 8 years. One more vague sentence from my mother didn't even register as strange. I didn't think much of it at first. I was used to being the labor and him being the face. What I didn't know yet was that my parents had already had a document drawn up months earlier. One that would be finalized publicly the night of the gala, right after Kevin's toast, with a plaque unveiling to make it official in front of the whole town. The first crack showed up on an ordinary Tuesday in March, when I sat down with a loan officer at Ashcombe County Federal Credit Union to renew the restaurant's equipment financing. I'd done this exact appointment a dozen times over the years. This time, the loan officer, a young guy with a lanyard full of pens, pulled up the property file and frowned at his screen. "I just need to confirm current ownership before we process this," he said. "It looks like the county has this listed as single member now. Kevin Holland, 100%. He turned the monitor toward me like I might want to double-check it myself, the way you'd point out a typo. I remember laughing, actually laughing, because it had to be a clerical mistake. I told him I was a 50% owner, had been for years. He shrugged and said the filing was dated 8 months earlier, recorded with the county recorder's office, and that as far as the bank was concerned, that was the document of record. I sat in the parking lot afterward for 20 minutes with the engine off, staring at my own hands on the steering wheel, before I drove straight to the recorder's office instead of back to work. Here's a question I want to put to you before I go further, because I genuinely didn't know the answer yet myself at this point in the story. If you found out tomorrow that a family member had forged your signature on a legal document, would you go straight to the police and press criminal fraud charges, even knowing it would blow your entire family apart in public? Or would you try to handle it privately first, quietly get the document reversed, and let them save face? I want to know what you'd do, because I went back and forth on this for weeks, and the answer I landed on surprised even me. Drop it in the comments, I'll actually be reading them. At the recorder's office, a clerk pulled the physical file for me, an ownership transfer and release agreement, 3 pages, notarized, my signature on the last line. I stood at the counter under a buzzing fluorescent light and looked at it for a long time, long enough that the clerk asked if I needed a chair. It was close. Whoever had made it had clearly practiced. The slant was right. The size was right. I even recognized the slight tremor in the downstroke of the R that shows up in my signature whenever I'm signing quickly. But I've been signing my name since I was 12 years old. When my grandmother Louise sat me down at her kitchen table and taught me how to sign a check, and she drilled one specific thing into me. After the H, in Holland, I always finish with a small upward hook, almost like a check mark. A habit, she said, would make my signature impossible to copy without knowing it was there. I looked for that hook on the notarized document. It wasn't there. Whoever had traced my signature had copied the shape of my name perfectly and missed the one detail nobody could see unless they'd watched me sign 1,000 times. I asked the clerk if I could see how the original had been submitted, and she pulled up a scan showing the source. A permit application from 2019 for kitchen hood ventilation work, the one I'd filed myself with the county building department during the very renovation my grandmother's inheritance had paid for. My real signature, full and confident, hook and all, sat right there on a permit I remembered signing on the hood of my truck in the parking lot outside this same building. Someone had gone digging through public permit records to find a clean copy of my name to trace, and they'd chosen the one piece of paperwork that proved, better than almost anything else could, exactly how much of this restaurant I had personally built. I asked the clerk where the document had originated, and she pointed me to the notary block at the bottom. Rhonda Preston, Notary Public, commission stamped and dated. Rhonda had been coming to Thanksgiving at our house since before I could walk. She ran the print shop 2 doors down from the restaurant. My stomach did something ugly when I saw her name there, because it meant this hadn't been some anonymous forger. It meant someone in my own life had helped my parents get away with it. I didn't say anything to anyone that week. Instead, I told my fiancé, Nathan. Nathan is an accountant, methodical to the point that it used to annoy me before it started saving my life. And when I put the transfer document and the county filing on our kitchen table in front of him, he didn't say a word for almost a full minute. Then he asked me for access to the restaurant's shared bookkeeping login, the one we'd both used for years to help with tax prep. It took him 4 days of quiet work in the evenings after his real job to find it. 2 separate lines of credit had been drawn against the restaurant property in the months following that 8-month-old filing. One for $41,000, a second for $63,000, both signed out by Kevin, both using the property as sole collateral. Which only would have been legally possible if he was on paper the only owner. The restaurant, appraised the year before at roughly $610,000, now had over $100,000 in debt quietly stacked against it that I had never agreed to and never even knew existed. I remember the night he found the 2 credit lines. He'd been hunched over his laptop at our dining table for almost 3 hours, a legal pad beside him covered in his small, cramped handwriting, when he finally sat back and said, "Rachel, come look at this." He turned the screen toward me and pointed to 2 disbursement entries buried in a statement from a lender neither of us recognized. Someone drew against the property twice this year. $41,000 the first time, $63,000 the second. Both times, the collateral paperwork lists a single owner. He looked up at me over his glasses, the way he does when he already knows the answer to the question he's about to ask. "You didn't co-sign either of these, did you?" It wasn't really a question. I told him I'd never even seen the lender's name before that night. Then Nathan found the messages. The restaurant had one shared business email account that the whole family used for vendor orders and invoices. And because Kevin had once set up his phone to sync through it years ago for convenience, an old backup of his iMessages had been quietly archiving to the cloud storage tied to that account ever since. Something he'd clearly forgotten was still running. Nathan found a thread between Kevin, my mother, and my father from 8 months back, the same week as the filing date. My mother had written, "Just get it notarized before she asks any questions." My father had responded that Rhonda owed him a favor and would take care of the paperwork Friday. Kevin's reply was 4 words long. "Okay, don't tell Rachel." I read that thread standing in my own kitchen with my coat still on, and I want to be honest with you about what it did to me, because I don't think dramatizing grief is the point of this channel. I didn't scream. I didn't cry, not right away. I put my phone face down on the counter, sat in the chair across from Nathan, and asked him to walk me through the numbers again from the beginning slowly, because I needed something to do with my hands that wasn't shaking. A few days after Nathan found the messages, I was at the restaurant printing out Gala floor plans when my father walked into the back office while I still had the recorder's office scan and the credit union statements open on my laptop screen. My heart did something violent and immediate. I closed the lid a half-second too fast, and he paused in the doorway and asked what I was working on. I told him invoices for the linen rental, which was technically true of the folder sitting right next to the one he'd almost seen, and he nodded and asked if I'd confirmed the head count for catering. I said I had. He left. I sat there afterward with my hands flat on the closed laptop, breathing through my nose, and understood for the first time just how carefully I was going to have to move for the next several weeks. 2 weeks later, we had a family dinner at my parents' house, the kind we'd had 100 times before, pot roast and my mother's good plates. Partway through the meal, my father mentioned, casually, refilling his wine glass like it was nothing, that once Kevin was officially running things, he wanted to talk about updating the restaurant's insurance policy. My mother added that they were thinking of retiring the following spring, once the transition was settled, and asked if I'd be willing to keep helping out on the maintenance side, after that, the same way I always had. Kevin didn't even look up from his plate. He speared a piece of carrot and said around a mouthful of food that he'd been thinking about repainting the dining room a more modern color, once he had full say over the space. As if he were describing a house he'd bought with his own money, instead of one I'd rewired myself. I sat there with my fork halfway to my mouth, gripping the edge of the table hard enough that I could feel the wood grain in my palm, and I said it sounded like a great plan. I meant it as the most loaded sentence I have ever spoken in my life, and not one of them heard it that way. I drove home that night with the radio off, the whole 30-minute route, replaying on the maintenance side over and over until it didn't sound like a real sentence anymore. I already had the Gala logistics folder on my laptop. Every vendor contract, every AVQ, the full run of show for the night, because organizing it had been my job for months. So I built one more file into that folder. A single slide, 3 images side by side. The notarized transfer document with my forged signature, an authentic signature sample pulled from a mortgage document I'd signed the year before, and the county filing showing the ownership date. I didn't add commentary. I let the hook stroke under the H speak for itself. I built it to trigger the moment the projector screen behind the podium switched from the anniversary slideshow to my cue, time to hit right as the plaque unveiling was scheduled. Which brings us back to where I started. The gala was in full swing by 7 that evening, string lights over the new patio. The mayor's office sending a deputy with a proclamation. 100 regulars I'd known my whole life holding plastic flutes of Prosecco. My father gave a short welcome speech about 25 years of hard work and family. My mother stood beaming beside the ownership plaque, still covered with a small velvet cloth, waiting. Then Kevin stepped up to the podium for his toast, thanked the whole team, never once said my name, and gestured for my mother to pull the cloth off the plaque. That was my cue. I walked up before she reached it, took the second microphone that had been set up for the ribbon-cutting remarks, and asked everyone to look at the screen for one moment before the unveiling, because I had something that belonged with it. My hands were steady. I want that on the record, because for 8 years I hadn't been steady around this family, not once. I clicked forward, and the 3 images filled the screen behind me, the forgery, my real signature, the county filing, all 3 feet tall behind my brother's shoulder. I told the room, in plain sentences, what the images were. I told them I had put $180,000 of my grandmother's inheritance and 8 years of unpaid labor into this restaurant on a promise that had just been quietly signed away 8 months earlier, using a copy of my own signature that I never gave. I said the notary who'd stamped it was standing somewhere in that room. Someone near the bar audibly gasped. My mother's hand was still hovering on the velvet cloth. Kevin's face went the color of the tablecloths. Rachel. My father said my name in the exact tone he used when I was 17 and had missed curfew, low and warning, like volume alone could make me stop. I didn't stop. I pointed to the missing hook stroke on the screen, the one detail my grandmother had taught me at her kitchen table, and said that anyone in the room who'd ever watched me sign a receipt at this restaurant was welcome to compare it themselves. Rhonda Preston, standing near the coat check with a flute of Prosecco still in her hand, set the glass down on a passing tray and walked toward the side exit without a word. Nobody stopped her. My mother finally let go of the velvet cloth, and it slid off the plaque on its own, revealing Kevin's name engraved alone in brushed steel, which only made the 3 images behind me land harder. I just kept talking until the deputy from the mayor's office quietly stepped forward to take a photo of the screen with her phone. The rest of that night is a blur of camera flashes and my mother pulling me into the coat closet to hiss that I'd destroyed everything. As if the destruction had started that evening and not 8 months earlier at Rhonda Preston's print shop counter. The fallout took the better part of the following year to fully settle. The forged transfer was voided once I filed a police report and handed over the county filing alongside Nathan's financial records. With the ownership legally reverted, the bank discovered Kevin's 2 lines of credit had been secured under false pretenses and called both loans in full within the month, forcing him to sell his car and a condo he'd bought 2 years earlier to cover the difference. The county recorder's office opened a fraud inquiry into the original filing, and Rhonda Preston lost her notary commission entirely once the state board reviewed the document and found she'd notarized a signature without the signer present. A flat violation she couldn't talk her way out of. My parents found out what it feels like to have their own community turn a cold shoulder in a town where everyone still remembers everyone's order. Old friends stopped calling. The Thornwell Gazette, the same paper that used to quote Kevin as the future of the business, ran a much shorter piece about the recorder's office inquiry, and my mother stopped answering her phone for most of that spring. I used everything we'd gathered: the filing, the forged document, Nathan's financial trail, the messages, to reclaim my legal ownership stake through the courts. The hearing itself took less than 20 minutes. The judge looked at the county recorder's fraud referral, looked at the permit application signature next to the forged transfer, and voided the document without much debate at all. Once it was mine again, though, I didn't want it. I'd spent 8 years fixing pipes and building patios for people who tried to erase me the second it was convenient, and I didn't want to spend the next 8 doing the same thing with a rebuilt trust I no longer had. I sold my half of the restaurant to Marcus Griffin, our longtime kitchen manager, a man who'd worked the line for 11 years and never once taken credit for something he didn't do. He'd been the one who quietly covered my shifts the week of the court hearing without being asked. No questions, just a text that said, "Go handle your business, I've got the floor." I sold him my stake for well under market value, on an installment plan he could actually afford, because I wanted the place to survive under someone who'd earned it the honest way. I used the proceeds, together with Nathan, to start a renovation business of our own. Nathan handling the books, me handling everything with a hammer, which felt like the first honest division of labor I'd had in this story. Nathan proposed 6 months after the gala, in the gutted shell of our very first client's kitchen, down on one knee in sawdust, and I said yes before he finished the sentence. The iron skillet is still standing under Kevin's name today, but it's a smaller operation than it used to be, no capital left to reinvest, a reputation still bruised from the headlines, half the regulars quietly eating elsewhere now. He had to let 2 of the weekend cooks go last winter to cover payroll, and the patio I built by hand over 4 weekends 8 years ago sits half-empty most Fridays, the string lights still up but fewer tables filled beneath them. The family group chat, once buzzing daily with photos of the dining room and event planning, has gone almost completely silent. The only message in the last several months came from a lawyer's office, forwarding paperwork related to the ongoing recorder's office inquiry, and nobody in that chat has said a word since. I still drive past Corbett Avenue sometimes, mostly out of habit, and I won't pretend it doesn't ache a little to see the sign my grandmother commissioned still hanging above a door I no longer walk through. I want to tell you something that happened after I first shared this story, because it's become one of my favorite parts of doing this. In the weeks after a lot of you started messaging me, worried that your own family's property deeds or wills might have something off about them too. A signature that looks almost right, a filing date, nobody can explain a family member suddenly a little too eager to handle the paperwork. If that's you, I want to hear about it. Tell me the red flag you noticed, no matter how small it seemed at the time, because I've read enough of these messages now to know that a lot of you caught something real. And talking about it out loud in the comments might be the thing that helps somebody else catch theirs before it's notarized. My grandmother taught me that little hook stroke under the H in my name when I was 12 years old, sitting at her kitchen table, and she told me it would make my signature impossible to copy without someone knowing it was there. I don't think she ever imagined it would be the exact detail that saved a restaurant, but it was. Here's what I took from all of it, and it's the thing I actually want you to leave with tonight. Trust inside a family isn't protected by love or by good faith or by a handshake across a kitchen table. It's protected on paper, in writing, with your own name on it. And the moment I stopped assuming the people who raised me would just tell me the truth was the exact moment I finally started protecting myself. If this one hit for you, you know what to do. Hit subscribe, drop your own paperwork red flags below, and I'll see you in the next one, right here on Revenge Marrow.